Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's workshop on the Farmstay Ordinance. We're going to take a moment and give people a few more minutes to sign on, so we'll be starting momentarily. Okay, our numbers are slowly increasing, so it'll just be another moment or two before we get started. Okay, well, I think it's time for us to get going. Welcome, everyone. My name is Joan Chaplick. I work with MIG, and we're a planning and design firm that is assisting the county with conducting outreach for the Farmstay Ordinance. I'll be serving as the moderator for tonight's workshop. So just to give you a little preview of what we'll be covering. So our purpose tonight is to get feedback from you on the proposed Farmstay Ordinance. So we're going to start with a presentation that will describe to you what it's all about. We've also done a survey during the month of December. We'll be sharing the results. They served as a starting point for how we prepared for this meeting. And then we have the bulk of the time reserved for questions and comments. And we have 5 specific questions that we'd like your input on. And then we can use the remaining time for comments, questions, so people will be able to speak. In terms of the features that we'll be using on Zoom tonight, please use the chat to send us in any comments or questions. We'll be capturing the comments and the questions. We will stop periodically to answer so that you can stay involved in the meeting. So that's a key feature, whether you're on your phone or your computer. And then also, when we have the question and comment period, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you, and we can take you off mute and you'll be able to speak. So there'll be a variety of ways for you to participate in tonight's meeting. So just to review, please use the chat. Send us your questions and comments. We'll stop periodically. When it's time for verbal comments, you can use the raise hand feature. And we're also going to be using a digital whiteboard to keep track of the comments, and periodically we'll switch between the presentation and the screen so that you can see the full view of the notes that we're receiving. The webinar is being recorded. The presentation will be posted after the meeting is over, and we will be keeping and downloading all of the comments that we get from you in the chat so that we have a full record of everyone's participation tonight. So that's how we'll be running tonight's meeting. And with that, I would like to now introduce David Lackey, Supervising Planner with Santa Barbara County, and he's going to get us started with a presentation. David?
Okay, great. Thank you, Joan. And first, I was just kind of perusing. I want to thank everybody who's taking time out of their evening tonight to provide comment, and we want to hear from you and learn from you. And this is just the first kickoff of the Farmstay Ordinance project, so certainly we welcome you in attendance tonight. I also want to acknowledge we have in attendance Supervisor Joan Hartman from the 3rd District, so thank you very much for attending. And I wanted to, before we jump right into the Farmstay Ordinance, just to give a reminder and We all come into these different projects with different understanding and also different relationships of other projects that may be going in on the county. And so there are several planning project initiatives that are underway that touch upon rural lands and agricultural uses and tourism and recreation. And so just wanted to acknowledge those and just to provide sort of what they are and sort of what Farmstay is distinctly. And so in addition to the Farmstay ordinance that we're here to talk about tonight, the Board of Supervisors have also given direction to pursue what we're calling agricultural tier permitting ordinance. And just as a prelude, we're searching for a better name for that project. So if you have any good suggestions, send them our way. But again, this is another project that came out of some of the proposed ordinances that were adopted for the Gaviota Coast Plan area. And so it looks at permitting a series of new small-scale agricultural uses that are supportive to the primary agriculture, such as agricultural processing, composting. It also has some tourist-related type of uses in terms of small-scale campground and other additional activities such as small-scale events and educational experiences. So that dips a little bit deeper into the tourism topic than the Farmstay project. But that project is a little bit behind the Farmstay project. We just got a consultant on board recently, and so we'll be starting outreach probably later this spring. And so certainly if you're interested in those topics, we'll be sending out notices of those meetings where the public can engage and provide comment. Another project is the Recreational Master Plan. And so this is being developed out of the County Public Works Department. And it's looking at sort of a regional perspective of both kind of the existing policies that seek to promote and facilitate a variety of different recreational opportunities and experiences. And so this will also look at developing new policies, looking at needs assessment, and also potentially some relationship with what can we do to provide greater interaction with rural landowners and opportunities for agritourism. And so that also is another initiative touching upon both recreation and tourism and rural lands. And believe Public Works is already or about to later this spring start engagement and the stakeholder engagement and public input process. So a lot of really good projects moving forward. They touch upon our rural lands, but I wanted to distinguish what we're here tonight for is really just one narrow aspect of that, and that's looking at farmstays. So with that prelude, let's jump in. So why farmstays? What is a farmstay? There's a lot of different definitions, but essentially a farmstay is a working farm or ranch, and it's partially oriented to visitors and tourism by providing lodging and accommodations. Some of the benefits of the farmstay is that it provides the farmers and ranchers an additional revenue stream to help support their current and future agriculture operations. And this in turn also has a benefit to fostering the economic development within the rural region and the local community. And another aspect and benefit, probably of equal or greater importance, is that the farmstay provides a rural experience for the guest and also opportunity for the agricultural landowners to put a personal face and story to their local agriculture operation, and also the experience of their family operations and agricultural land stewardship. So a lot of positive boxes to tick off with this type of use. Next slide, please. So in September of last year, I kind of alluded to, the Board of Supervisors had a public hearing to consider what the scope of the what the Farmstay Ordinance should look at. The board heard a range of requests from the public, including consideration of looking at farmstays being allowed on smaller Ag 1 parcels and also smaller parcels less than 40 acres. And with all of the public input, and there was, I think, a desire to move this ordinance forward quickly so that landowners could take advantage of these new uses. The board directed staff to work on the Farmstay Ordinance that was modeled after the ordinance that was adopted for Gaviota. And so that was focused as a base of allowing farmstays on agricultural 2 zone lands. And so this ordinance will not look at the ordinance where it would allow farmstays on agricultural 1 zone lands and smaller parcels of less than 40 acres. Next slide, please. So this slide kind of just highlight bullet points, the main components of the existing ordinance that is in effect within the Gaviota Coast Plan area. And it is the only area within the unincorporated county where farmstays currently are allowed. So the primary tenet of the farmstay is that it's located on a farm or ranch where agriculture is the primary use. So the farmstay is truly designed to be incidental to that primary agricultural use. The farmstay would need to be located on a lot of 40 acres or greater, and only 1 farmstay operation is permitted. The farmstay can accommodate a maximum of 15 guests and up to 6 bedrooms. If food service is provided, it's only available to registered guests and would need to be included in the rental price for the lodging. And the farmstay itself would need to be located within an existing dwelling. No new structures would be allowed. And the ordinance that was adopted for Gaviota was intended to be promoted with a low-level permit. So in the inland area, that would be a land use permit, and in the coastal zone of Gaviota, it's allowed with a coastal development permit. So you'll notice that 2 of those bullets are shaded in green, and for a reason that we're going to be discussing later that we want to get your input and comments on. So as a prelude, we'll be talking more about the 40-acre minimum lot provision as well as the no new structures provision. Next slide, please.
Oh. David, before you go on, there was a question that came in and it was answered via the chat, but it may be of interest to the larger group. It has to do with, does the existing homestay ordinance apply to Ag 1 lands?
Good. Yes, that's a good question. So that we make a distinction between farmstays and short-term rentals / homestays. So that's short-term rental. Homestay is also a use, a lodging type of use, a short-term rental use that was adopted by the board several years ago. The homestays, you can do a homestay on the Ag 1 zone properties, but you can't do a homestay on the Ag 2 zone properties. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thanks, David. So again, I just want to encourage, if there are questions, please send them in through the chat. We'll stop periodically and ask them. We do have a question too about someone not able to stay. So the presentation will be posted and it'll be on the county's website in the planning division. David, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. So let's continue to move forward. Um, as we were preparing for going out to the community, in December, we thought it would be good to get a pulse and find out what topics were of greatest interest. So we did a survey in December. The county sent out more than 3,000 email notifications, and we had 199 people respond. So just some highlights of the results: that 77% were generally supported. 40% of the respondents owned agricultural land and were interested in the farm stay. 49 expressed 49% expressed no specific concerns. And then when we asked about specific concerns, we found that they were specific to traffic, parking, noise, environment, and or impacts on farming. So just going to share a few more of these results. You can see the questions here in terms of who participated in this survey. And again, this was to give us a starting point for tonight's meeting. Um, then we also asked about support, and as you can see, the level of support for expanding the area of the county where farm stays allowed was high, with 77%. Then we asked about some aspects of the farm stay proposal that were of greatest interest. And David described some of these when he was talking about some of the benefits of farm stays. And we found that people could pick more than one answer. So, you know, the most popular response dealt with providing economic opportunity for local farmers. Then this was followed by providing an educational opportunity to increase understanding of the county's agricultural resources. Um, and then, you know, close below, opportunities to help protect and strengthen our local farms, and then also to respond to a growing interest from visitors to have a different or unique experience. We asked about concerns, so we had, you know, almost half had no specific concerns, and again, we had a list, and participants could select more than one topic. So these were some of the topics that came up. We also received several in the other category. And then we asked an open-ended question at the end of, do you have any other comments? And, you know, we do a lot of surveys in my world, and out of 199 respondents, we got almost 100 open-ended comments at the end. And they were very informative. They helped give us, you know, a little bit more detail about people's thinking. And generally, they included many positive comments about farm stays and the potential benefits. There was a request to consider the Ag 1 lands, consider farms and ranches less than 40 acres, consider looking at additional structures. People expressed additional concerns about traffic and parking, concerns about tourist behavior and potential impacts on operation. And then we received several comments related to cannabis. So this was just to give us kind of a flavor to find out where people were most interested in. And when we distill it all down, we found that of the comments we received, there were three groupings of comments that were outside of the board's direction to staff. And I think David spoke about this in the beginning. Smaller than AG1 zone parcels, less than 40-acre lots, and then also influencing the number of guests and bedrooms. But within the scope, there were some comments that created some questions that will follow this shortly. They had to do with the 40-acre premises instead of a 40-acre lot, comments about new structures being considered, and also some comments related to development standards. So these were the 5 general topics that emerged, and the county staff would really like to get some feedback from you on tonight. And then for each one, David's going to give a quick framing of the issue, and then we'll stop. We'll take your comments through the chat, and we have a digital whiteboard that we'll be capturing these comments on. And so that's how we'll proceed. And then the remaining time we'll have open for public comment, and we can take people off of mute. You can ask your questions and comments, and we'll see if, we'll try 2 minutes a person to make sure that we get a chance for everyone to speak. Before we go a little further, though, I have a question. Are vineyard properties included in this effort, David?
Yes, so if they're on Ag 2 property and would meet the other requirements that the principal use is primarily in agriculture, those would be, and the other size requirements, they would be eligible to apply for the farm stay.
Okay. Okay, great. So vineyard properties are included. So with that, we're going to get started with our first topic. So David, if you could kind of frame the staff's question to our community members tonight.
Great, thank you, Joan. So this one should be pretty straightforward, and then we look forward to your input. So in the example graphic here, we've got an agricultural landowner who has 80 acres of land consisting of 4 parcels of varying sizes. So under the existing Gaviota Farmstay Ordinance, the requirement is that the farmstay be sited on a 40-acre minimum lot. So really, the only eligible lot in this situation would be the 40-acre parcel colored in red to the north. However, all properties are different. This may not be the best location for the farmstay for a variety of reasons. It may be very steep, other constraints, either resource constraints, it may be the principal ag production area. You've got vineyards or cultivated fields, or maybe located away from the existing infrastructure and developed area on the ag operation. So there are, with the current language of the 40-acre minimum lot, it can be in certain situations limiting and restricting. So one concept to consider, and that we would like your input on, is should the ordinance, rather than consider 40-acre lot minimum, view it as a 40-acre premises minimum. So the zoning ordinance and planning department, in a variety of different conditions, we look at premises as the adjacent lands under a single ownership. And so obviously in our graphic example here, the landowner owns all of these adjacent parcels. So it would be considered, actually an 80-acre premises. So obviously the benefit is it provides increased flexibility for the property owner and individual situations on various properties. And so if the ordinance were to pursue premises instead of lot, the example here in the lower right-hand yellow parcel could be the best location for siting the proposed farmstay itself. And I did just want to note, so that's really the question that we would like your input. Is that something the ordinance should consider, premises versus lot? I did also want to mention that as part of staff's research, we are going to be looking at a potential alternative that we look at when we do environmental review for the project, of whether or not to consider farm stays on Ag 1 parcels that meet that same 40-acre minimum premises. So it maintains the objective of farm stays on larger agriculture operations. So I wanted to just let you know that is something that staff is researching, and it could potentially be looked at as an environmental, while we're doing environmental review. So
Okay.
I'll turn it back to you, John.
Okay, so here's where we'd like you to weigh in and just give us your thoughts on any preference for which direction the county should go. Should they, currently it's a 40-acre lot, but the county is willing to consider that it be a 40-acre premises. So if folks could send their comments and questions in through the chat. So I do have a question, David. How would it work if part of the parcel is lease? Could the lease also provide farm stays?
I mean, as far as the land premises itself, it's still under the same ownership. We have to look at who would be obtaining the permit for the farm stay. And so that's something we can research and get back to you at our second workshop, whether or not the lessee could apply for the farm stay permit.
Okay. Let's see, we have a comment that premises makes a great deal more sense. So we would love to have you weigh in. So if you have a preference, just send it in through the chat. And we'll keep adding them to the whiteboard, and then I'll continue to get clarification on some of these questions. So why is the minimum 40 acres and not 5, 10 or another number? So if you could explain where that 40 came from.
It comes from a variety of concepts. So the minimum parcel size within the Ag 2 zone that you can create a lot is 40 acres. It's also at a level of ag size that generally would qualify for agriculture preserve. So it's an indication that the parcel is suitable in size to be predominantly engaged in agriculture as its primary use. And so that was some of the concepts that went into setting the 40-acre minimum lot in that Gaviota ordinance.
Okay, thanks, David. So we have another comments. The 40-acre premise makes sense. We have a similar situation as described where the acreage of all APNs is adjacent is greater than 40 acres, but the best area to have a farm stay on a space is a less than 40-acre parcel. So the flexibility makes sense. So that's a comment from one of the participants. We have another comment coming in. Yes, please consider the 40-acre premises. Are there any other zoning precedents in distinguishing premises versus lots? I.e., how are they regarded in other cases? So David.
I actually will maybe ask one of our senior planners in attendance, Julie Harris, who is our sort of zoning ordinance guru, if maybe she would weigh in on that question.
Hi, David. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Joan?
Sure. So the person is asking, are there other zoning precedents in distinguishing premises versus lots? So how are they regarded in other use cases?
Let's see. I'm going to see if I can. I know there's some, and it's just you're asking me to answer the question on the spot.
So how about if I give you a moment to think? I'm going to read some of these comments in the chat to keep us moving, and that'll give you a second to kind of pause. I'll come back to you in a second, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have some comments here. Premises give more flexibility for different types of activities, such as educational groups to see different aspects of farming. Let's see, we have a yes to the 40-acre premises. Another yes, should allow farm stay per 40 acres of premises. Another comment, premises make sense as long as the permit does not transfer if smaller property is sold. Another comment of support for premises under the same ownership, and that the county still has some relic AG2 parcels under 40 acres within large ag properties. We have a comment urging consideration of less than 40 acres. Okay, we'll note that. We're going to try and stick to this question here of the lot versus premises. Let's see, a comment that this person is supportive of revising the language to focus on a 40-acre premise. They want to confirm that this would not trigger a voluntary merger, recordation of new easements. So I'm going to go back to the planners. David, if you could maybe answer this one, and then maybe Julie, if you're ready, we could have you respond to that other question.
So I can answer the first one, or the most recent one, Joan. So yeah, that concept, it wouldn't trigger any voluntary merger of the lots. It's really just looking at a qualifier that the applicant for the farmstay can demonstrate that they meet the at least 40 acre minimum of adjacent land holdings. And so, but it wouldn't require any type of lot merger.
Okay, so they just wanted to check and make sure, there wouldn't be any requirements triggered. We have another yes to the premises, and also some additional comments advocating for AG1 lands. Another premises sounds practical. A question, if we go to premises, do the other parcels need to be zoned AG2? Would it affect the zoning in any way?
They would need to be all of the similar qualifying agriculture, so they have to be AG2.
Okay, thank you. We have a comment, premises is used for wineries. And let's see, uh, for winery operations, for determining processing capacity, we use adjacent parcels under same ownership. So I think we have an answer to the previous question about other uses of that. We have another comment, the Gaviota Coast Plan use premises in some context with the Coastal Commission. Let's see. So and we have some additional comments on encouraging farm stays on smaller acreages. So any other comments or questions on the 40-acre lot versus 40-acre premises topic? And Julia, I'll come back to you if there's anything you want to add to that question, or we could, keep moving and see if we can follow up later.
Hi, Joan. I suggest keep moving. The wineries answer somebody gave, it is used as well, although I don't recall off the top of my head if it's a 40-acre premises. And I believe Gaviota is also a correct answer, but nothing else is coming to mind right now.
Okay, and we've had some responses provided by Commissioner Joan Hartman, so we can definitely trust those answers. Let's see. And then we have another comment about historic ranch properties with something related with the headquarters often on a smaller parcel. So I think this isn't something unique. It's something that's being considered for this. So we have quite a number of comments here, and this is exactly the type of and quality of feedback that we're seeking to receive. And I think just based on what we've seen so far, there's a fairly reasonable level of support for the county to consider the 40-acre premises. So with that, we're going to go back to the PowerPoint, and we're going to go to our next discussion question. And this is the pattern we're going to follow for the following 4 questions. So David, now if you could tell us a little bit about what the county would like to know about converting existing structures.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joan. So wanted to kind of touch upon what the current Gaviota ordinance speaks to, and then that kind of raises questions in and of itself. So the existing ordinance requires the farmstay operation to be housed in a single permitted or non-conforming dwelling. So it speaks specifically to a dwelling. I reread it this afternoon, and that was an important consideration because when we're doing a PowerPoint, I listed structure, but so that's one point of consideration that we want to talk about. Of one, either allowing conversion of existing structures, not just dwellings, to be used for the farmstay operation. We're going to also, the next topic that we get to is we're going to be talking about should the ordinance consider allowing new structures, but part of this conversion also is, talking about, if new structures are to be allowed, all of these examples of how the farmstay can be accommodated, they're all going to be discussed within the context that there's still going to be maximum of up to 15 guests that can be accommodated in up to 6 bedrooms. And so if we're talking about existing structures, it could be some combination of structures, but you still have that limiting provision that no more than 15 guests or 6 bedrooms. So some of the things to consider regarding existing structure conversion, whether it's you have a large farm or ranch house and it's suitable to be used for the farmstay, sort of like a bed and breakfast. That may or may not, it's probably the most straightforward of approaches, and it may or may not require any additional building code upgrades, but there could be potential requirements, accessibility requirements that need to be met. And so it really is on a case-by-case basis. For all of these farm stays, whether it's within an existing dwelling or in a new structure, they're going to have to meet building code requirements as well as environmental health requirements. And this example actually was one that I believe was up in Sonoma County, and it was an agricultural building on a winery, and they converted the second floor, I think, to 2 units for the farmstay. And so it's a great integration of existing structures on an agricultural operation. Certainly fits within the context of the ag operation well. And so, I guess one of the questions that we want to get input on is, should the ordinance consider allowing existing structure conversion, not just limiting the farmstay to be sited within existing dwelling or non-conforming dwelling? And next slide, please. So the next series of slides really speak to consideration of new structures. Again, with the same caveat that they could accommodate the maximum allowable guests and bedrooms. So it could be accommodated with new structures such as cottages. Next slide. Park trailers or mobile homes. So many of you may be familiar with the park trailer. I believe there are some at Lake Achuma providing lodging, and also at El Capitan Canyon private campground on the north side. On the bottom slide, you'll notice, essentially these are on wheels. They're on a frame that can be mobile. And they're actually, the trailer itself is approved by the state because it's essentially considered a recreational vehicle. And so our building department would not get involved with the park trailer itself unless there were external improvements that required a permit. And so it potentially could be a large deck. And certainly if, as required, these type of structures would need to be served by an approved water and wastewater system, those would also be subject to not only our building code review and approval, and also environmental health review. Next slide, please. Again, a couple of other examples of park trailers providing lodging opportunities on rural lands. They come in a variety of different shapes, sizes, styles, suitable for a lot of different landscape and rural contexts. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, all of these structures that would be used for farm stay would need to be served by an approved water and wastewater system. And depending upon existing septic systems and wastewater systems, whether or not the existing system could, these structures could be tied into those systems. There may be a need, depending on site location, or it may be favorable to have a central system where potentially 2 or 3 cottages are served by that central system. And that, just to note that temporary shelters such as tent cabins could not be used for a farm stay.
Okay, so are we ready to get people's input, David?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to switch to the whiteboard and let's. So we've had a number of comments already come in, so I want to read them off. So we had a comment about don't get stuck with the Coastal Commission limiting language from Gaviota Coast. Allow flexibility of conversion of one or more structures, not just dwelling, and also allow for new structures. We have another comment about that it's really important that ADA issues be clarified. Would love to see adaptive reuse, but code demands will be tough. We have a comment, Pamela shared an experience about looking at this about 6 years ago. The permitting process, ADA requirements in an historic building, and needing a commercial kitchen was prohibitive. Plus fire roads, etc., and event permits were very high cost. We have a suggestion about allowing creative structures such as vintage Airstream trailers, yurts, and glamping tents. David, are yurts Airstream, has that been clarified?
We are still researching the requirements for the sort of like the Airstream and yurts. Tent camping, glamping, that would not be allowed. It really needs to be a structure that's served by water and wastewater. The Ag Tier permitting project is looking at small scale campgrounds as a use, and so, but yeah, we are still going to be researching the allowance of additional types of structures such as yurts and Airstreams.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have a commenter who encourages all these options, but then also shares a concern about guests closer to residential areas. So we'll be capturing the full comment, and it can likely be shared in an additional part of the meeting. We have a question here. Would there be any criteria for determining if the project would be reviewed by BAR? And if you could explain BAR and what that process might be, that would be helpful too.
BAR is Board of Architecture Review. So there are several regional Board of Architectural Review committees that review development applications that in certain developments are subject to Board of Architecture Review. It's a good question. Hadn't considered that, and so I think we'll need to get back to you on certain areas like Gaviota. Most development is subject to BAR review and even heightened review in certain areas. But we'll look into that and try to get you a better answer at our next workshop.
Okay. Let's see, we have a comment from that increased flexibility is supported as long as ag as the primary activity is not sacrificed. We have a question or comment about, are there limits on lengths of stays with the farm stay ordinance?
So the farm stay is a transient lodging. Some jurisdictions have limited the length of stay. So it couldn't be more than 31 days or more than 30 days. But and that in general is one of the things that we are continuing to do, is to also look at, how have other jurisdictions that have adopted a farm stay ordinance, what were their issues and concerns, and how did they, facilitate those types of uses. And we'll look to see if there's any jurisdictions that have identified a stay limit.
Mhm. Okay, good. And I appreciate a lot of these comments are also helping identify, where county staff can get best practices from other communities and do some additional research. We have a comment about please allow flexibility for conversions of non-dwellings, new structures and temporary ones like airstreams, park mods, fewer building code problems than existing single family dwelling. Yurts might qualify under a small campground. Let's see, then there's a question about what about a campground where guests bring RVs or use tents along with or instead of owner provided rooms? Is that something covered by the farm stay?
No, so that's not part of the farm stay, but as I had mentioned, the ag tier permitting project, which is trailing a little bit behind this project, but we'll be embarking upon our stakeholder and public engagement probably this spring. That does have a small scale campground use, which currently is allowed in Gaviota, but we're considering those uses countywide.
Mhm. Okay. Let's see, we have a comment that it's let's see, important to allow conversion of existing structures as well as new structures. Farmers need as much flexibility as possible to increase revenue streams. And it also provides much needed lodging and helps guests build the relationship with the land. Okay. Um, let's see, if new structures or converting existing buildings are not allowed, then building a farm stay becomes very limiting and possibly not worth doing. Okay. Let's see, we have a comment about a use for apprentice-like stays, such as those of WOOF, the Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. And that's where resident volunteers stay on and help with ag activities. So just a question of how something that might be accommodated. We have a concern about whatever is pursued that night sky pollution be considered as an important component of the design. So a comment to that we should allow new dwellings and revisions to dwellings. Um, on the face of it, it seems reasonable. Will the owner have time to personally manage rooms or meals, or will he or she need to hire staff? And then if so, what size is needed to make the project economically viable? I think each of the farm stay applicants would be working to consider that. There's a question, would outdoor gathering areas such as fire pits, recreation areas be allowed for the guests?
That is a good question. I had thought about that, and it's the current ordinance in Gaviota is silent to those uses. So, um, I think that's something that we do want to get more input and do some research. I mean, it may make sense, particularly if the ordinance does allow, new structure or clustering of those structures. Um, it, there may be interest to have some common area. Um, so thank you for that comment. That was one that crossed my mind as well. So we will do some research and we can talk more about that at our next workshop.
Okay. And then we have a comment about the issue of ag being the primary activity is tricky because many kinds of agriculture are not particularly profitable, and the objective of farm stays is to augment the ranch revenue. But there could be instances, especially in drought years, when the farm stay income far exceeds the income from ag. So, uh, any comments on just the primary ag use of the property, David?
We'll touch upon it a little bit. In the Ag 2 zones, um, there's roughly, I think 750,000 acres of Ag 2 zone land that's in an unincorporated area that isn't federal land or state land. And a majority of that is in ag preserve. And so they have to demonstrate that the principal use is agriculture, whether it's if it's a rangeland, they've got a grazing lease. If it's vineyards or cultivated or orchard, they need to demonstrate in terms of generally acres in production. And so there are a majority of the lands that could be eligible for farmstead that already are, have demonstrated that by being in the Ag Preserve program. And so those are some of the metrics that the county would look at in terms of making the finding that the principal use is for agriculture. It doesn't have to be the economic. It's really just, it's the primary land use of the property. And that's often expressed through demonstration that, it is in ag production or either through rangeland or some type of orchard or cultivated use.
Okay, thanks, David. We have some additional comments. It makes sense to be flexible about the building to be used. Some ag buildings may no longer be needed for ag and could be converted. Also, can there be some flexibility about using small structures that are easily moved or removed? We have a couple of comments specific about, profitability not being a qualifier, and then also a follow-up comment related to the primary ag use definition. And I think David provided some information about how that is assessed. Let's see, would the county consider cannabis cultivation a primary ag use?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. So we've gotten a lot of good comments, and we really appreciate your feedback and questions is, again, helping to guide staff follow up on these activities, whether it's research on additional topics or um, zeroing in on the topics where there's a lot of agreement. So just really appreciate everyone's participation in the chat. Okay, so it seems like we've gotten a lot of good feedback in this area here. So I'm going to switch back. We'll go to the PowerPoint and we'll have David take us through the next issue. Okay, and so now nuisance and compatibility issues.
All right, thank you, Joan. So kind of tying from some of the comments and responses that we heard in the survey, the operation of the farmstay in and of itself, would result in the introduction of a temporary population increases into our rural lands. And several respondents had noted potential concerns related to such issues as potential increases in noise and traffic, and concerns on the potential compatibility of the uses on both the on-site agriculture as well as joining agriculture operations. And since we've talked before, one of the main tenets of the farmstay that is intended to be incidental and to the primary agricultural use. If new structures were to be allowed or conversion of existing structures, one of the considerations may be the visual scale in the rural context, as well as site location. And so some of the questions that we may want to get input on is, should there be any size limits to individual if new structures are allowed? Should there be any size limits? Or if new structures are allowed, should there be a limit of how many new structures? Would one or two or additional structures be allowed? And sort of the last concept related to that we'll talk about next is really site location. And that one of the main issues related to that is clustered farm stays within sort of the developed area, or would remotely sited farm stays be allowed? And so the ordinance itself, it can address any of these concerns, typically through looking at appropriate development standards that can be incorporated into the ordinance that the farmstay permit would need to adhere to. And so we wanted to open up and get any comments and feedback on potential concerns related to nuisance or compatibility, and turn it back to John.
Okay, so yeah, so just to follow up on what David just shared, um, just your comments, concerns, questions related to potential nuisance and compatibility issues. Um, some of the topics he mentioned, site location and such, I think also in the next question, you have a little bit more information about that as well, explaining how certain things work. So let's see what we have in terms of comments related to potential nuisance and compatibility issues. Let's see, we have a comment. I just want to make sure it's shared. It's not quite in response. It may be connected to our last discussion, but it talks about, instead of talking about enhancing ag income, perhaps use the term like stabilized sources of income. One does not want to see farmstead income become so dominant that the farmer or rancher reduces or begins to eliminate ag uses, but maybe consider a possibility at looking at income over time and not just annual income. Okay, then we have another comment that size limits are unnecessary. Limit it to 6 bedrooms on the premises. 40 acres or larger takes care of any problems. Okay, other thoughts on the topic? Okay, and you know, we still have 2 more questions, and there's an open comment period. So if there's not a lot on this issue, we can redirect that time to other discussions. Okay, and Ms. Hartman unfortunately has to leave. Thank you for your participation and also some very helpful comments you sent in. We do have a question. Are there any ideas on anticipated setbacks?
It would probably just have to adhere to any setbacks within the Ag 2 zone. And so they're pretty minimal. Generally, it's a front setback. And so, yeah, setbacks typically aren't that challenging to meet the requirements in most agricultural rural land projects.
Okay. So we have a comment, the issue of noise, since it's not a farming activity, it's not protected. So it's up to the host to ensure their activities are not a nuisance or they will be subject to complaint. Okay. Other comments, let's see. We have a comment about, if the countywide outdoor lighting ordinance is completed, it should help control any light pollution problems, but hillside projects could be a problem and need to be carefully checked. Then we have, let's see, a suggestion. The ratio of bedrooms to acreage makes more sense than a fixed limit of 6 rooms, regardless of premises size. Another comment about noise. It's been a big issue in the past with wine site activities. Noise needs to be controlled as it can be a major irritant. Okay, let's see. And we have a comment here. Let's see. And the comment is from Puck. I'm not sure if I have your full comment. It says, you see this as a potential problem with neighbors. Setbacks should be greater than standard ag development standards. So, okay, so I think his comment is linked to David's reply. We have another comment, how some ranches share common private access road so that one owner may have to cross other owners' lands to get to the ranch. The potential for up to 6 new cars a day traveling these kinds of roads can be troubling. This should be considered. But in most instances, traffic and noise isn't relevant on most ag properties. We have a comment that existing light and noise ordinances should apply rather than creating separate rules. Okay. So any other comments regarding potential nuisance and compatibility issues? Okay, so we have fire and safety roads for evacuation need to be considered. Okay. So, and again, if any comments come in while we move on to the next section, we'll still capture them and grab them and put them on our whiteboard. So it seems like things have slowed down. Let's see. So we have another one, need to look carefully at the question of location on acreage. There are pros and cons for clustering versus remote location, but when you need utilities, clustering seems much easier. So maybe we can use that comment as a transition to our next topic. So I'm going to take us back to the PowerPoint. And David, if you want to pick up on low-level permit and how it relates to that comment that was just expressed about siting.
Great. Thank you, Joan. Yeah, so this sort of transition into the site location on the next slide, but wanted to kind of start off as, one of the objectives that both the existing ordinance and what we've heard from those that are interested in the Farmstay ordinance is that, there's time and cost for any permit at the county. People that want to pursue this, there's an interest to try to get permitted as straightforward with the least cost and time as possible. And I think that's probably for any applicant in the county. And so generally, the land use permit will have, it is a low level permit. In the coast, its sort of counterpart in the coastal zone is called a coastal development permit. And so there's a lot of factors that, even though, the ordinance is structured to have this relatively low level permit, there can be a variety of factors that may influence, both the amount of review that's necessary, not only by the planner, but potentially both with the building department as well as environmental health. And so one of the staff objectives, and is to start off with trying to draft an ordinance that's clear and straightforward in terms of what the requirements are. And so that is one of the things that we will be working and striving towards. But two of the things that are really going to influence that is what type of farm stay is the applicant pursuing. If the ordinance allows either to convert an existing structure or to construct new dwellings or structures, that could influence the amount of review and time. And also, I think probably one of the factors that's going to influence it the most is site location. And so let's jump into the next slide, because that really kind of ties into some of the concepts that we wanted to talk about. The concept of clustered versus remote siting. And so this, in general, this discussion, let's just think about it in terms of if the ordinance would allow both for conversion of existing structures as well as new structures. So the photo at the top shows, at least a concept of farmstay operation. I believe this was in West Virginia. So don't take anything other than the concept that it's clustered within the existing developed area. It's close to existing infrastructure. It's not remotely sited or intervening between various agricultural areas on the property. And so there's efficiencies with clustering the development within a already developed area. Remotely siting, you start to stack on the areas that may increase the environmental review and potential impacts. As many of you know, most development in our rural areas needs to come up to code and to current fire standard requirements. So that may be widening the road, and depending on the length, there may need to be fire turnouts constructed. Once you start looking at developing areas that haven't previously been disturbed, I'm going to need to look at resource constraints and potential impacts, and this could be archaeological resources, biological resources, looking at how it may affect agricultural soils within the area. And then obviously just the infrastructure, not only the roads, but in terms of water and wastewater. In the photo at the top, actually these, I guess the four units in the foreground, they all are served by a common wastewater system. You know, so there's efficiencies in time in both cost and permitting that would have to be duplicated or could be even more costly if you're remotely siting the farmstead. And then sort of the last concept that I wanted to bring to your attention, and it also will be covered in, I think, our last informational slide. As I mentioned previously, you know, roughly 64% of all the Ag 2 zoned land in the unincorporated county area currently is in Ag Preserve program. And so, as many of you know, that's a voluntary program. Landowners enroll their lands for rolling 10-year contracts to keep them in agriculture. And in exchange, they receive a reduced tax assessment that's based on the agricultural production of the property. But also part of that is that they need to be in compliance not only with the state Williamson Act requirements for agriculture preserves, but our local rules, which are called the uniform rules. And so the uniform rules require any non-agricultural development to be located or clustered within the near the dwelling, personal dwelling, within up to a 2-acre envelope. So, for example, the graphic on the bottom in the lower right-hand corner, just for example, on contracted land, any non-agricultural development, including farmstays, would potentially need to be located and clustered within proximity to the existing dwelling. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about is at least, you know, the discussion about clustered versus remote siting, and then whether or not, if new structures are allowed, or maybe farmstays are only allowed if it's a conversion of an already existing permitted structure. So kind of just trying to tease out some of the issues around both remote versus clustered siting. But they also have a correlation not only to potential impacts, cost for permitting and review, but also potential whether or not it's consistent with the agricultural preserve contracts for many of the eligible land. And I think, yeah, that concludes sort of the two slides that touch upon using the low-level permit as a springboard, but really the conversation, I think, you know, what we're like seeking input in terms of the concept of clustered versus remote.
Okay, so we will get our, let's see, we'll get our comments. You know, I have a great, good-sized workspace here to get all these comments that have come in. We really appreciate everyone's participation. So I think in response to the questions that David has highlighted, you know, clustered versus remote or some of these other concerns, we had a comment come in about the need to be flexible on ag properties, especially since on ag properties, ag and existing development are occupying most of the topographically friendly areas. So something to keep in mind. Let's see, there's a question. What if there is no existing residence and none planned? Can the owner still have a farmstay?
So that's an interesting sort of ordinance topic. So most uses need to be accessory to the existing principal use, like the principal dwelling. On agricultural lands, there are some uses that can be permitted, like agricultural employee dwellings can be sited on an agricultural property without a principal dwelling. on the far end of the spectrum, um, if you were looking at lodging opportunities under the guest ranch provision on agricultural lands, obviously that in and of itself is sort of a use that's allowed by a conditional use permit, so it's really not tied to that principal use. So this question had crossed my mind in preparing for the presentation, and so I think we need to discuss it further, but yeah, we'll definitely bring that up at our next workshop. Typically, most uses on agricultural land, most structures need to be accessory to a principal use or structure, which typically is the residence.
Okay, thanks, David. So we have a question. There hasn't been any mention of permitting costs. Do you have any information or advice about that?
I don't have it on hand right now. We can provide that at the next meeting in terms of just the basic permit application costs for a land use permit versus a conditional use permit. Obviously, there's variable costs just in terms of that may be associated with the whether or not the owner would need to provide some additional studies, or maybe there's some soil tests. And so there's a variety of factors that can influence the cost, but we'll try to provide at least some additional helpful information at the second meeting.
Okay, thanks, David. So we have a comment that while remote siting might require more examination initially, I think part of what we're trying to achieve is the visitor's relationship with the land, as well as the contrast between cities and agriculture. Mobile lodgings like Airstreams and yurts allow the host flexibility to separate guests who might like privacy, as well as showcase various parts of their property that are worth highlighting. There might be a solution that involves only mobile structures, maybe remotely sited. We have another comment. Farm stays should be allowed use as a matter of right, and they should only need zoning clearance, whether it's the LUP and the CUP are unnecessary. We have a comment that I think the family in residence is central to the concept of farm stays. We have a comment, yes, to having development standards. Remote scattered siting is unlikely due to cost constraints and other practical problems, not a major concern. Why are homestays not allowed on AG2 land if a property is not an active farm? So, David, if you or someone on your team wants to answer that.
Well, I want to be clear. I guess the question is make sure we're using the correct terminology. So homestays is different than farm stays, what we're talking about today. And so going back to my comment on whether or not a farm stay could be sited on a Ag 2 property without a primary dwelling, that's something that we need to talk about and internally more, and we can provide more information at the second workshop. But as I said, typically most uses, aside from ag employee dwellings on ag land, the structures are identified as accessory to the principal dwelling on the site.
Okay, thanks, David. Let's see. Any other comments related to this general topic under the low-level permit that David described? Remote versus clustering, some of the siting concerns. I think we have a good number of comments here. So with that, how about if we go back to the fifth of our 5 topics that we wanted input on, and then we'll have plenty of remaining time for general comments and questions.
Yeah, thank you, Joan. And this slide is more informational than anything else. Kind of had mentioned it. Maybe we can go quickly to the next slide that shows the map. Thank you. So this map shows two shades of green, all of the unincorporated county areas that are zoned for agricultural 2, excluding the federal land and most part of national forest and Vandenberg Air Force Base and any state lands. So it's all essentially the privately held Ag 2 zone lands. The dark green, so that's roughly 775,000 acres. And the lighter green, excuse me, the darker green is showing the Ag 2 zones that are currently enrolled in our county agriculture preserve program. And so that's roughly, let's see, about 494,000 acres. So about 64% of all the Ag 2 zone lands that could potentially be eligible for the farm stay. 64% of those are currently have an ag preserve contract. So could we go back to the first slide, the prior slide? Thanks. So not only will this project, as we move forward and looking to adopt a new zoning ordinance, both to allow the farm stays within the inland area and the coastal zone, but because many of the lands that would be eligible for the farm stay are an ag preserve, we will also be looking at proposed text amendments to our county uniform rules. And just as a recap reminder, the uniform rules are the adopted rules of how the county implements the Williamson Act at the local level. And so often those uniform rules can be more restrictive than base zoning requirements in many situations. So the first level of the uniform rule amendment that we'll be looking at is to allow, or at least to consider, farm stays as a compatible use on ag preserve contracted land. I previously had mentioned when we were talking about clustering that currently the uniform rules requires that any non-agricultural development that is allowed on ag preserve contracted land, it has to be clustered within up to a 2-acre envelope that is around the primary dwelling. And so there are clustering requirements, and those are likely to be an issue that's discussed if farm stays are considered. The County Agriculture Preserve Advisory Committee is a board-appointed advisory committee that reviews development application and proposed changes to the uniform rules. So we will be, staff and the consultant will be seeking to present the proposed ordinance and draft language amendment for the uniform rules and to the committee. Also part of this conversation that we'll have to begin shortly is talking with the State Department of Conservation. So they're the state department that oversees the statewide Williamson Act. And they also review proposed amendments that local participating jurisdictions have to local uniform rules for implementing the Williamson Act. And just to note, back in 2007, the county had embarked upon sort of a major overhaul of the uniform rules, looking at expanding some of the uses that could be cited on agriculture preserve contracted land. So even back then, the county had proposed what we had called small scale guest ranch at that time. And it was essentially the same provisions. It was 15 guests, 6 bedrooms, but it didn't have any limitation. It could be within new structures such as cottages. When the Department of Conservation reviewed that draft, they responded saying that that approach would not be consistent with the state Williamson Act. And so the county, prior to taking it to the Board of Supervisors for adoption, had to rework those rules. And that is one of the genesis of how the farm stay had to be within an existing structure. That's really where it came from, is that concept was at least expressed in 2007 by the Department of Conservation. So if the county is going to be considering allowing new structures, and since the majority of the lands are within Ag Preserve contract, we will have to have that conversation with the Department of Conservation of how we potentially could find new structures for farm stays compatible on Ag Preserve contracts. So I just wanted to let you know, some of you are aware of that process, but it is going to be an important component that we also are going to be pursuing in parallel with the zoning ordinance amendments.
Okay, well, let's see if we have any questions or comments as it relates to farm stays and agricultural preserves. And I think David gave us a review of some of the additional considerations that would be taken into account. So let's pause a moment here and just see if anyone has any questions or comments on that topic. Okay, we have a comment. I thought the Board of Supervisors had somewhat opened the door to various kinds of ag education activities that did not require overnight stays. When will there be discussion of what non-overnight activities might be allowed? So where would those activities fall? Would it be in this ordinance or another place, David?
That would be within the agriculture tiered permitting project that we've mentioned, that looks at some of not only the uses that were adopted in Gaviota, considering those countywide, but also the board also directed that the ordinance look at some small scale tourism related uses. One of those being educational experiences where you can bring members of the public on the property. It could be educational seminars or to learn more about the habitat and biology of a property or the agriculture operations. Is also going to be looking at small scale events, the small scale campground that I mentioned. So there's a variety of different uses, and those are all going to be addressed within the proposed ag tiered permitting project.
Okay, thank you, David. Other comments or questions as it relates to farm stays and the agricultural preserve lands? Okay, well, we can capture any that come in later, but just want to do just a quick review here of the volume and quality of feedback that we have received throughout this meeting from you all. So we really appreciate that. We also too want to allow some time for just some general comments and questions. If you want to continue to send them in through the chat, you can. Just one comment I want to read out that was specific to the ag preservation. And it seems like there's a few more coming in. So I'm going to go back there before we move on to our next section. So we have a comment, given development costs seem problematic if they would have to drop out of Williamson, maybe cottages, etc., with minimal structural footprints could be considered. I hope that farm stays as a compatible use on preserves will be seriously considered. Okay. Okay, so with that, how about if we move to just general comments and questions? So we have one coming in. What would qualify as educational activities or components?
Again, that's not part of the farm state ordinance. It's going to be addressed as part of the agriculture tiered permitting project, which is trailing a little bit in terms of schedule behind us. But some examples could be where a landowner has, wants to either, bring people or groups on the property for a birding session, or it's maybe an educational or agricultural seminar that they're hosting on their property. So it could be a variety of agricultural resource type related educational experiences.
Okay. Do we have other comments or questions? We do have quite a bit of time, as we have reserved, also to have some verbal comments. So we really appreciate you using the digital tools. It's been able to help us receive information and get your questions in a really time efficient manner. We have some general comments coming in through the chat. I'll read them off. But we'll be doing next is we're going to switch screens and just pull up a screen that has a timer. And if you would like to make a verbal comment, or if you want to ask a question, you can use the raise hands feature, and you'll be able to speak to the larger group and also get any questions answered by our panel. So just want to read off some comments that came in. As a general comment, I strongly support farm stays to help preserve the long-term viability of the agriculture in our county. It's a low impact activity that can make it possible for families to stay on their land and stay in agriculture. We have another comment. I realize for the farm stays, food in the evenings will be required to be allowed. You can't have people stay without feeding them. For the vineyards with farm stays, please consider allowing food during the day for day visitors, even if only overnight guests are allowed to eat in the evening. Okay. Um, so is there anyone who would like to comment verbally? So if you want to use the raise hand feature, we can take you off mute and give you a chance to speak. Okay, we have our first commenter has raised their hand. So let's start. Our first commenter is going to start us off. We have a 2-minute comment period. So John Park, you're our first commenter. Okay.
Yes, thank you. I led 3 different workshops on farm stays and agricultural tourism at St. Mark's Church a year ago and beyond. And we formed a farm stay advisory committee with representatives of all kinds of agriculture. We spent a lot of time working with staff. I really appreciate staff's willingness to work in a collaborative fashion. It's really been a cool thing to do, given some of the tensions that have been between the agriculture community and planning staff in the past, but the long distant past. It was a very good presentation. I want to make a couple of points. One, of course, you're always welcome to contact me, and my email and cell phone number are both on the County Planning Commission website. A point that we've learned in working on this as our committee is that farm stays are an essential part of agricultural tourism, and that agricultural tourism is supported by all forms of agriculture, including mainstream row crop up in Santa Maria area, which you wouldn't think is going to have farm stays, because it helps brand Santa Barbara agriculture as something really special. We have innovative agriculture here and tremendous diversity. I call it the Silicon Valley of agriculture, and I mean it. So it's the kind of thing like the rising tide lifts all ships. If we have a successful program, we will have better branding of our agriculture, which helps everybody. Very important point that we haven't addressed yet tonight is the speed of adoption of this ordinance. People are eager to get out with the COVID restrictions. They're eager to get these streams of income. And what we found is that farm people are interested in large part in just getting this adopted as soon as possible. Thank you. Okay. I'll yield my other 5 seconds.
Well, thank you, John. And given your position and level of involvement, if you needed some additional time, we'd be happy to give you some additional time on the timer. So, but thank you for your remarks. Do we have any others who would like to make a verbal comment to the group? And you can also continue to add your comments in through the chat. Let's see, we had a comment come in, just a comment. If the process is so complex that an army of consultants is needed, it will be difficult to pencil out. And yes, the food connection is critical. They're very supportive, but unfortunately they have to leave early. So please continue to send those comments in through the chat. And do we have, let's see, we have Jessica Schley is our next speaker.
Hi, I hope you guys can hear me all right.
Yes.
Just a quick question. How long of a process is this? If, for instance, I had a property that was perfectly well qualified and I wanted to apply, how long is it going to take for this process to be completed before I can apply? And then once I apply, say everything is just right on the property, how long would it take me for that application to go through?
So we'll get, so in general, the schedule for this, ordinance itself, we're hoping to, we'll talk about next steps, but in general, we're hoping to get to the decision makers in summer and to the board in late summer or fall to adopt the ordinance. As I mentioned, there's both the inland and coastal zoning ordinance. So any adoption of the inland ordinance would take effect, 30 days after the board adopts it. With the coastal zone, after the board adopts it, we have to then submit that to the Coastal Commission. And unfortunately, as many of you are painfully aware, it's a much lengthier process just even to get that certification. In terms of just, when the ordinance is in place, the time again is going to be variable. It really depends upon what type of farm stay you're going to be proposing. There potentially is going to be some, building department review of if it's a conversion or maybe it's a new structure, as well as environmental health review for adequacy of the wastewater system. So there's some things that are, really unknown in terms of the exact time, but hopefully we can try to provide a little bit more information, both in cost and general time expectations at our next workshop.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and just for future commenters, if you do ask a question, we stop the timer during the answer in case you have additional comments or questions that you want to ask. So thank you for your question, Jessica. I want to share a comment that came in, a commenter who is echoing the ask that you not create such a complex permitting process that only the wealthy can afford to pursue it. Okay. Do we have any more hands? Other folks who would like to make a comment verbally? And I also want to ask David, if you or your other colleagues that are supporting you tonight have any, additional information or some points that you think would be helpful to add during the discussion. We do have a fair amount of time for additional questions and comments.
In addition to reserving some time at the very end to just go over next steps of what we all can expect, there's one point that I think I skimmed over. We were talking about the maximum. Well, a lot of these standards, they're all based on the 1999 California Homestay bill. And that was a bill that was passed by the state legislature, really to try to help agricultural landowners, have a farm stay on their property. And one of the big sticking points was, providing food service and the cost to get a commercial kitchen permitted. And so by meeting, those standards really come from the California Homestay Act, the 15 guests, 6 bedrooms, meals served to registered guests only. Those come from the California Homestay Act. And those, if those provisions are met, then as far as the regulations for environmental health, they're less stringent than other bed and breakfast or other facilities that also have a food service component. And then the second point that I think I glossed over was those same levels, the maximum 15 guests or 6 bedrooms. If someone wants to do more than that, both in the existing Gaviota ordinance and likely to be in our proposed ordinance, The landowner can pursue that, under the existing ordinance provisions under the guest ranch. And so that's obviously a much more complex type of operation for lodging on rural lands. But there is at least a permit path if somebody wants to do something more substantial. What we're trying to do is really to facilitate, a low-level permit for a lodging opportunity that provide those benefits that we've talked about to the landowner as well as the guests in terms of supporting and celebrating our local agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a few more comments have come in. How to enable farmstays? While not bankrupting farmers and ranchers as they apply to participate is really important. And then we have another comment about the commercial kitchen requirements for food service is astronomical for farms or ranches. There's a question, is it true that Santa Barbara County is the only county in the state that doesn't allow farm stays?
Well, we do allow them in Gaviota. So
Okay.
tongue in cheek, but I don't know. I mean, we are going to be doing our research on those jurisdictions that have, adopted ordinances and that are really working well, that we can try to not reinvent the wheel. So, but as far as I don't have any statistics on whether or not I would presume we are lagging far behind some, kind of common coastal counties like Sonoma and Napa, and certainly even San Luis Obispo.
Okay, so let's see. Could food trucks be allowed in lieu of commercial kitchens?
I don't know that answer. One of the things that we might schedule for our second workshop, I think it would be helpful for all of us if we invite one of the staff from environmental health who can answer a lot of those poignant questions. But I don't know the specific answer, but we can look into it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Could we speed up this process by adopting some of the existing policies that San Luis Obispo, Napa, Sonoma counties already have in place?
I mean, that will help in terms of looking at sort of a menu of things that, at least appear to work well and that we can incorporate into our own ordinance. But there's still, we need to go through the ordinance adoption process, and that will also have an environmental review component. So, staff has heard clearly from the board that they want this to be move forward quickly, and in part that was their decision also to not look at the smaller Ag 1 parcels. They wanted to use the foundation of what was adopted in Gaviota as a base starting point. Doesn't mean down the road that the board may want to further allow farm stays on other land, but part of their decision making was to, we want to get something in place and adopted that works for everyone, and let's use what was adopted in Gaviota as a starting point. But so the county has to adopt our own regulations, and there's a process and time associated with that. So, but yeah, we will be looking at other jurisdictions for what they've incorporated in their ordinance that works well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, David. So, are there anyone else would you like to speak? And if not, it looks like the comments and questions have slowed down. I don't see any hands up. There are a few more food service related questions. Could food service come from off-site and be provided by caterers? And David, would these be more of the environmental health questions that we would follow up on, or can you answer that now?
I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, I think it's something that we will follow up with either with environmental health or just in general and be able to talk about that at the second workshop.
Okay. And then we have a request for additional information. If you could elaborate on why new dwellings would not be allowed on land without an AG preserve contract.
So was trying to do at least the most recent conversation of farm stays that the county has had with the Department of Conservation was, as I mentioned, back in 2007. And at that time, we were proposing to allow essentially a farm stay as a compatible use on ag preserve contracted land. And that would also allow it as new structures, cottages. The Department of Conservation reviewed our proposed change and stated in a letter to the county that that was inconsistent with the Williamson Act. Their primary take was the intensity of the new structures and uses from a led the property to move towards that use being from a financial and fiscal situation, the primary use of the property. And so that was part of what we heard from them at that time. And so wanting to get something adopted, the county had revised our small scale guest ranch rules to say that it had to be within an existing structure. That, for a variety of reasons, never went forward beyond that point to allow a small scale guest ranch. So that doesn't exist, but at least the conversation of farm stays / small scale guest ranch on contracted land, there is a prior history to it. So I just want to make people aware of, and that staff will start engaging with the Department of Conservation to see, I think many of you, and I saw Susan Petrovich in the list here earlier, who's well familiar with both our county agriculture preserve program and the state. But the state in general, my take is that they've become more relaxed in the last 10 years, particularly since there's been a lot of changes to the ag preserve program. So hopefully we can work with them to find a way that if new structures are allowed, that some number of those could be found to be compatible on contracted land.
Okay, thanks, David. And a question, where in the county regs would one find information about guest ranches? So do you know, can you, what section you might refer that person to?
We will look that up and get to you before we close out here.
Okay. Yes, I think we could just reply through the chat while we're going to finish up our final slides. So I think we've answered all of the questions that have come in. A couple of people have gotten a chance to speak. We have a whiteboard full of very informative, high quality comments. You've helped us identify some topics where it would be helpful for the staff to do some additional research. We've gotten a sense of, for our next meeting, what topics would be of greatest interest, and David's suggestion of bringing someone from environmental health to make sure that those questions can be answered completely. So you've really given us a lot of really positive, supportive, and helpful information as county staff works to advance revisions to the ordinance. So with that, I think, David, if you can pause from looking for the guest ranch section, and maybe one of your colleagues can send that info through the chat.
Sure.
We'll have our we'll bring up the final PowerPoint slide. I'm going to ask my colleague Anna to pull that up. And so, David, if you want to let us know what's next.
Sure, thank you, Joan. So kind of moving forward into the spring, we're looking at tentative dates to schedule our second workshop sometime in March. We'll also be working with two of the board advisory committees that I mentioned, our County Agriculture Advisory Committee, as well as the Agriculture Preserve Advisory Committee, to get their input and comments. After the second workshop, we'll be taking all the information that we've received and the comments and working on revising the draft ordinance. Once we've got a draft ordinance, we'll start the kind of environmental review phase. So that'll be this spring. That'll be another opportunity for the public to comment on, once the environmental document is released, you can comment on the adequacy of that document. And so we're projecting to try to get the project, the ordinance amendments, to the County Planning Commission in the summer of 2021 for their recommendation to the board. And so again, that's an opportunity for the public to comment and provide their input. And then to the Board of Supervisors, likely in late summer, early fall of this year. As I mentioned before, the coastal zoning ordinance will need to be submitted to the Coastal Commission for certification. So that can take a more lengthy process, can take, from 12 to 15 months for that process beyond when the board hearing is. So unfortunately, that is still going to be a more lengthier process than the ordinance for the inland portion of the county. And so, and just the kind of the final slide was just additional information. If you have additional thoughts and want to convey those, you can send them to me directly with my email there. It's dlackey@countyofsantabarbara.org, countyofsb.org. And also you can go to our Farmstay website on our planning and development webpage, and there's additional information on the existing ordinance. And then as we start collecting more information, we'll be posting it to the website. After this workshop, we'll be posting a summary of the comments that we received on the whiteboard. And then also we'll be working on trying to get a recording of tonight's workshop linked to our YouTube webpage. So then we'll provide a link on our website where people could view that who may not have been able to attend tonight.
Okay, well, I think you have a good preview of what will be coming up in terms of the opportunities for future public engagement, and then the overall timeline that we're looking at. David, you did an excellent job answering so many questions this evening, and he's provided his contact information, so please contact him directly if you need any additional information. And then also the Farmstay website is an excellent resource. Please come back to, we'll be using that as a place to post information related to this activity and future upcoming activities. So with that, I really want to thank everyone for their participation. David, I'll turn it back to you for one final thank you to the group.
Yeah, and then just thank Julie Harris of our staff who looked up the zoning code section that people were interested in finding more information about the guest ranch. And so for our land use development code, that's our inland zoning ordinance. I'll just read off the section that you can look up. It's 35.42.420, as well as 35.82.060. And so that provides information on guest ranch requirements and also the conditional use permit requirements for a guest ranch. So yeah, I wanted to thank, we had a great attendance tonight, and really, I was so pleased with the breadth and the really insightful comments that we received. And so we'll be working with MIG and Joan and Tricia and Anna to help sort that information and to try to identify how we can incorporate some of those features. And then we'll be working on continuing the agenda for our virtual #2 workshop. We heard a lot of interest on food service and wastewater and permitting, time and costs. So I think those are all useful things that we can include in the agenda, as well as we'll be doing, as I mentioned, additional research on those other jurisdictions throughout the state who have implemented, really effective farmstay ordinances, and we'll try to identify some features of those that maybe we haven't addressed to date that we can discuss at our next workshop. So yeah, with all of that, thank you so much for taking your time this evening and providing great input. And I think we all agree that, you know, Farmstay is a really positive use that the county wants to promote and facilitate. And so we all want an ordinance that works. And so we value your input and you know, strive to get a very workable, efficient, and beneficial ordinance. So thank you again.
Okay, so with that, thank you again for your time, and we are officially adjourned. Good night.